and it just takes a moment or so to confirm. Okay, that's it confirmed. The meeting is now recording, and I'll now take the sedient for this special meeting of the Council of the 23rd of February 2022. We have Councillor Allison present, Councillor Anderson, Councillor Bradley, Councillor Brogan, Councillor Brown, Councillor Buchanan, Councillor Burns, Councillor Caliques. We have apologies from Councillor Callaghan. I'll just check, do we have Councillor Campbell? We don't seem to have Councillor Campbell. We have Councillor Carmichael, Councillor Chalmers, Councillor Convery, Councillor Cooper, Councillor Corbett, Councillor Cowie, Councillor Craig, Councillor Devlin. Can I just check, do we have Councillor Donnelly? No, we don't seem to have Councillor Donnelly. We have Councillor Dorman, Councillor Dryborough, Councillor Fagan. Do we have Councillor Faulkner?
Yes.
Thank you, Councillor Faulkner. We have Councillor Ferguson, and we have Councillor Fulton, and Councillor Gray, Councillor Greenshields, Councillor Hamilton, Councillor Harrow, Councillor Holford, Councillor Horn, Councillor Horsham, Councillor Hose. Do we have Councillor LeBlond?
Present.
Thank you. Do we have Councillor Lennon? Don't seem to have Councillor Lennon. We have Councillor Lockhart, Councillor Logan, Councillor Loudon, Councillor Lowe, Councillor MacDonald, Councillor Marsh. Do we have Councillor McAdams?
Present.
Thank you, Councillor McAdams. We have the Provost, we have Councillor McClymont. Do we have Councillor McCreary?
Apologies for Councillor McCreary.
Apologies, yeah.
Oh, thank you. We have Councillor McGavigan. Do we have Councillor McGeever?
You do, yes, I'm here. Sorry, I was struggling to find the button there.
All right, thanks, Councillor McGeever. Councillor McGuigan, Councillor McLaughlin, Councillor Miller. We have Councillor Nealon. We have Councillor Nelson, Councillor Nugent. Do we have Councillor Razak?
Good morning, I'm here.
Thank you, Councillor Razak. We have Councillor Ross, Councillor Scott, Councillor Shearer, Councillor Stevenson, Councillor Thompson, Councillor Walker, Councillor Wardhall. Do we have Councillor Wark? Oh, I can see you are here, Councillor Wark. Thank you.
Thanks.
We have Councillor Watson and Councillor Wilson. Is there anyone that I've missed? In that case, I'll hand back to you, Provost, for today's business. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Item 1, before we move on to declarations of interest, could I ask...
Provost, sorry, I've got my hand up.
Well, could we just get through this important item 1, please?
Okay.
Thank you.
I want to bring, as long as that doesn't preclude me from bringing urgent business, if you've started business.
No, you can't. Declaration of interest, can I invite Geraldine to make a statement before we start, please?
Thank you, Provost. I would like to remind members of the restrictions in voting in the setting of the level of council tax. Any member present who is at least 2 months in arrears with payment of council tax or who has outstanding bills for community charge or poll tax must disclose this fact as soon as practicable after the start of the meeting and refrain from voting on the proposal for setting the level of council tax. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest, please? No, thank you. Before we move on, Councillor Watson, you want to speak?
Thanks, Provost. I'd like to bring forward a matter of urgent business to full council today, and that being the South Lanarkshire Council's representation on the board of South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture. I think to protect the reputation of the council should be removing Councillor Peter Craig as council representative on the board. The reason I'm bringing this as urgent business today is that there is a board meeting this afternoon, and also Councillor Craig continues to be involved in the appointment of a new general manager. I think given the findings of a recent employment tribunal where Councillor Craig his conduct and stewardship was called into question, I don't think it's appropriate that he still continues to represent the council on that body. And I would like us to discuss that position under AOCB. Thanks, Provost.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Can I bring Geraldine McCann into comment, please?
Yes, Provost. As you know, it is for the Provost to determine whether a matter of urgent business can go on the agenda. There is no item already on the agenda covering that matter. However, I would advise that, in my view, it would be incompetent to have that on the agenda, as this relates to an ongoing legal proceedings, and any debate concerning those proceedings could be prejudicial to the ongoing proceedings. And also, it is possible that matters could be raised in the debate which would breach the Data Protection Act or the General Data Protection Regulations of the UK. I have already advised Councillor Watson of that earlier, towards the end of last week and at the beginning of this week. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Geraldine. Thank you.
Provost, can I comment on that, please? I think...
Please, 2 seconds, Councillor Watson. We've received legal advice here. It's not on the agenda. There will be other fora where you can discuss this, but this isn't one of them. So if you wish to make comment any further, please preclude any legal debate and the aspects that Geraldine's gone over, please.
Yeah, I think, well, one, I'd be interested in where the other forum's going to be that the councillors can discuss this, because I've just had 2 motions ruled out of as incompetent by Geraldine for next week's full council meeting, which, again, councillors only get no opportunity to discuss this. I would dispute the fact that it's a public document I'm referring to. There's nothing hidden in it. Councillor Craig's stewardship comes under serious questions, and I think it's not appropriate that the council continues to allow Peter Craig to chair, or even, attend, because it's for the board to decide who chairs leisure and culture, but to attend leisure and culture as one of our representatives when in a public document his stewardships come under serious question. That doesn't prejudice anything else that's going on. It's the council safeguarding its reputation, and I think that should be the position that we take as a council. And if that's not going to be the case as a council, I would urge either Peter Craig to do the honourable thing and stand down, or the SNP group to remove him as their representative. Thanks, Provost.
I'm keen to move on with the special business today. Geraldine McCann, could you just a comment, please, on that?
Yes, Provost, I would stand by the advice I have already given you. To understand the outcome of the tribunal, you would really need to understand all of the productions that were also lodged. That's what I'm fearful of, that the member who has raised this matter was a witness at the tribunal and may be aware of things that other people are not, and therefore to discuss any of those matters as part of this motion would potentially breach the Data Protection Act. I've also concerns that inadvertently some comments that could be made that could be defamatory or result in a breach, which would allow the council or someone to make a claim against the council to the Information Commissioner or to a court of law, and that could be individually against the member themselves, any member who made any of these comments, or against the council. So that's the reason for my advice, and as I explained, I've already explained that to Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Geraldine. I see a number of hands up here, I assume, to discuss this issue. The advice we've been given is unequivocal, so I'm really keen to move on. I'll take Councillor McAdams quickly, please.
Apologies, took my camera off and not my mic. I'm very sorry about that. I can be the first person for the meeting to do that. Thanks very much for letting me in, Provost. It's just to quickly say that I concur with everything that Councillor Watson said. Also, the other thing I wanted to say was it was actually to protect the council. Geraldine, I would have thought that you in your position, you were actually the person that was actually part of the proceedings. So I'm kind of were you trying to protect the council and protect South Lanarkshire leisure and culture? You were actually involved in that. I think that this has got the potential to get messy, and I think David is right to bring up everything that he said. And as I said, I do concur with everything he said, but are we not leaving ourselves wide open as a council for the fact that you're the person that's sitting back, and said?
Councillor McCarran, we've had the legal advice. I'm keen to move on. I don't want to breach any law here. Councillor Allison and Councillor Nelson wish to speak. Could you do it very quickly, and then we'll start?
Yeah, very quickly, Provost. I fully accept what Geraldine's saying today, but it does leave the position of when we as members can discuss this very important issue. We're within 2 or 3 weeks of the council closing down for the elections, and I think it is important that the current councillors have an opportunity to hear, discuss, etc., the issues here and decide how we go forward properly to protect the council. And I think it's that question that we do need to answer just now. When can this be discussed?
Okay, thank you. And before we move to the next item, I'll quickly take Councillor Nelson.
Can I ask, it was the same question round about that, when the members will get the opportunity. So I would like an answer to that before we do move to the next item of business, Provost. The other part was about Councillor Watson's proposal and bringing something forward today, and I think that's absolutely correct. We are not looking for a debate on it. We're looking for Councillor Craig to be removed as chair. That would be to protect the organisation as a whole. That would be to protect South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture and the council. If this was a normal person in a normal role, they would probably be suspended from their role pending a further investigation. So this is the right thing to do. This is to protect everyone. We're not looking for a debate. And whether that takes a motion to come forward now and that we remove Councillor Craig as chair and no further discussions are taken, then I'm happy to go with that proposal.
Geraldine McCann.
Thank you, Provost. The ongoing legal proceedings are likely to conclude at some point. We don't have the date for that yet, as I understand from South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture. We must remember that South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture were the party to the Employment Tribunal and not the Council. So the Council has no locus to debate the outcome of that Employment Tribunal at this point. I understand that a review has been commissioned by South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture, and I understand that will be shared with the council at point of once it's completed. I understand at that point that it would be appropriate to discuss it within the council, provided the legal proceedings have been concluded. And as I am not involved, I stress to Councillor McAdam and Councillor Watson, I am not involved in those legal proceedings. An external legal firm, I understand, act for South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture in that matter, and I don't know when the final remedies hearing will take place. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you. Thank you. As I say, I'm keen to move on with this. I'm not accepting this as an emergency item. We've heard the legal advice from Geraldine, which is unequivocal. So I'm keen to move on. I'll take Councillor Cooper and then Councillor Brown. That's it. I'm moving on. Thank you.
Just 2 points, really, Provost. And to Geraldine, the appointment of the chair of the board is a political decision. It's not, up to now, it has not been a board decision. And it won't be a board decision until the new articles for the board are agreed. So it continues to be a political decision. It was a political decision that was made at the time when David Watson was removed from chair of the board, and it's a political decision.
I thought we weren't discussing this.
It's a political decision today.
Continue to talk about it.
Okay, right. Well, I'll take Councillor Brown and then we're finishing. Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Provost. I've got some sympathy with this as well, because it seems to me that the advice we're getting from Geraldine, I'm sure, is legally correct, but the issue really is that the council are mentioned in this judgment. So it's not a matter of interfering with the judgment or anything of that sort. It's following through the implications of the judgment for the council. And it is highly unsatisfactory if there's not a method in the term of this council from people, if you like, who got some knowledge of the background to this, for there to be some sort of discussion about this. Now, I think that my colleagues have asked essentially for some sort of undertaking that before the council term finishes, there can be a discussion of some sort. Now, whether that's by group leaders, whether it's by some sort of private committee or something of that sort, fair enough. I think there has to be, however, though, some form of discussion about the implications for the council so we can actually go forward. There are a number of quite serious matters made in this report, and I think we have to be, I think we'd be negligent in our duty if we didn't actually take some account of them and have some format for taking it forward and deciding what to do with it. I should appreciate some degree of assurance from someone in authority that that will be possible before the end of the council term.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. As I say, I've ruled that this isn't being discussed today. We'll finish this up. I don't know, Geraldine, you want to speak?
No, I just wanted to add, Provost, that it is your decision whether urgent business is admitted to the agenda. This isn't on the agenda, and any decision you make on the matter is final.
Okay, thank you. So that is my decision. I'm sure it will be discussed at some stage, barring any legal difficulties. But we'll move on to item 2 now, which is the overall position of revenue budget and level local taxation 2022-2023, which is on pages 3 to 24 of your papers. And can I invite Paul Manning to speak to the report, please?
Right, thank you. Chair. Sorry, Chair, just before we go on, I'm quite conscious that I joined the meeting after attendance had been taken, so I wanted to make sure that I was on record as being here at the start of this item.
Susan, can you confirm that Mark Lennon is on?
I've taken note now, thank you.
Thank you so much. Paul Manning.
Right. No, listen, thanks, members. Good morning. As you said, this is the overall position of the revenue budget and the level of local taxation for next year for 2022-23. So under the background of the paper, it does start by pointing to the June 2021 budget report. And you can see in that first paragraph of the report that it talks about an initial budget gap of £54.4 million. And then it talks about the measures that were identified to get to a budget gap of £9.4 million. And the paper really is about the work that's been done since that point and the various stages that have been gone through. So on the second page of the paper, it talks about the 3 main parts of the report. You can see this summarised at 3.6. So in section 4, we've got the pre-settlement position, and that's about how that £9.4 million gap is bridged. We then talk about the impact of the settlement, and then we talk about additional stage 2 monies, and I'll come to that obviously under that section. But this really mirrors the 3 phases of the 2022-23 budget that you're aware that we've gone through. So if I can start with that phase around the pre-settlement position and the update to the 22-23 budget strategy. So this first part, and this is in section 4 of the paper, is about how that gap of £9.42 million is bridged. So you can see the measures that have been put in place in the table, which is just towards the foot of page 4, showing how that budget shortfall is bridged. And it also talks about the timing of those measures. And really, this is summarised at the end of section 4 in that piece of text that you can see is 4.4. And what it says is solutions totalling £9.42 million have been identified. So that element's dealt with, and we move on to the next phase, right, which was about the revenue budget settlement that came and was advised to members at the seminar in 2022. So both of these phases, that are covered in section 4 and section 5, they were the things that have been covered in that members' seminar that was dealt with on the 17th of January. So in that section, which talks about the grant settlement and talks about the monies that came through and compares them to the budget strategy, the point that's being made, and this is summarised in section 5.6, in comparison to our budget strategy, there was an improved position of just over £6.3 million. But what we identified was that we're going to face additional costs in relation to national insurance contributions and also in relation to changes to the council tax reduction scheme. And what that meant was that it left a balance, right, an extent to which we were better off in comparison to our budget strategy by £1.8 million. And you'll remember again, this was covered in that members' seminar on the 17th of January. The proposal as it stands in this paper is that that's allocated in two parts. In part, to additional inflation that the council is going to incur on its PPP contract. And that's because of the way inflation has moved across the latter part of last year. And there's also a proposal that an amount of £900,000 is allocated to South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture. And again, this is in line with the discussions that we had at that members' awareness session on the 17th of January. So the third phase that's covered in this paper is about Section 6, and that covers what's called additional Stage 2 budget bill monies. At the start of Section 6, we do note that in our budget strategy, there is a council tax increase of 3.5% indicated. And what that feeds onto in Section 6.2 is the fact that due to our share of an extra £120 million that was given out nationally, if there was a council tax increase of 3.5%, there would be an amount of £7.042 million available as capacity for investment. And at the top of page 6, the point is being made that we're looking to elected members to come forward and agree how that investment could be made. So at the moment in these papers, there's a single line that says investment of £7.042 million. So there is that opening there in terms of ideas around that investment. And the point is also made that we need to remember that that £7.042 million is non-recurring money, right? It exists for 2022-23, but not after that. Now, the remainder of the paper, having covered those three main phases of our budget discussions to date, looks a summary of the budget, and that feeds into the appendices at the rear where we've got individual budget identified against resources. It talks about how the council tax fits into that budget picture, and you can see that in section 7.3, right, where it talks about the net sum funded by council tax. And it also, as you move through section 7, gives South Lanarkshire's picture in terms of how our properties sit in council tax banding. Now, the report ends just by looking at the progress and the process for getting the grant settlement concluded, and that points to the parliamentary process, and it also looks at the budget for future years. Now, one other thing just on the parliamentary process, and you can see this covered in section 8, it just refers to the various stages of the budget bills, and it makes the point at 8.2 that in the Cabinet Secretary's Stage 3 budget statement, it was announced that the government would provide £150 to every household in receipt of council tax reduction, and also provide £150 to all other occupied households in Band A to D. So again, that's obviously a significant magnitude, and it needs to be pointed out to yourselves. So if I can go back to the recommendations, and I'll work my way through these, just given the nature of today's report. First of all, looking for noting in terms of the solutions totalling £9.42 million that contribute to that budget shortfall. Secondly, that following receipt of the local government settlement, the allocation of funds to meet additional costs at section 5.4, you can see those in the paper, be noted. That, as I referred to earlier on when I was presenting the paper, the allocation of £1.828 million, and that going to PPP inflation and South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture Trust, be approved. At 4, that the proposed council tax increase of 3.5%, which would set council tax for Band D at £1,245, be approved. That the capacity for investments of £7.042 million as a result of the Stage 2 budget be considered, and that the revenue budget for 22-23, including the base budget, is allocated to resources, and that's covered in the appendices as well, be approved. So those are the recommendations. Probably I'm happy to take any questions on the paper. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Allison, can I ask you to mute your mic, please?
Muted on the headset, Provost.
I think I can hear everything here, the movements. No, okay. Can I ask anybody whose mic isn't muted could do so, please? Thank you. I'm aware that elected members have time to consider proposals and have been kept advised of updates through briefings with the opportunity to ask senior officers questions. Given that, are there any final questions for officers, please? Councillor Allison.
Just one, Provost. Paul, I believe that part of the agreement for the £150 extra was that it had to be paid out in April, or it had to be allocated in April, whichever. Is that going to be a council decision? And if so, because I'm sorry if I've missed it in this paper, but how is that going to be achieved?
Okay, if I can come back, there is guidance which has been developed between local government and the Scottish Government about how this can be done. And one of the Scottish Government's key requirements is that it is dealt with in April. Right, so we're at present working through that guidance, and we'll look at a means for doing that.
Thank you. Any other questions, please? I can inform members that Councillor Ross has advised that he has an amendment to the officer's recommendations. And ask that Councillor Ross provides his amendment to the clerk to allow it to be circulated to all members and officers, please.
Thanks, Provost. I have circulated it to the clerk, and it would be happy if it was presented to all members, so that they can have a look at it. And also, with indulgence by yourself, Provost, if you would want me to wait a couple of minutes before I would have a chance to talk to that amendment, quite happy to do so.
Okay, thank you. If members are agreeable, 5 minutes.
Agreed.
Can I confirm who's seconding your amendment, Councillor
Yes, Councillor Margaret Cooper is sending the amendment, and the amendment is on behalf of the administration and the cross-party agreement, cross-party working group agreement. Thank you.
We'll reconvene it.
Engine route.
Apologies, the Provost was just saying Councillor Cooper will need to confirm that herself.
Yes, I confirm that I'm seconding the amendment.
Thank you.
Sorry, could I just ask, is this going to be put in the chat, or is it emailed out, or is it the one that was emailed out previously?
I've emailed it out, and I've also putting it on the chat as well.
Thank you.
Just seems to be a bit slow for the chat. Apologies. I think that's it, popped into the chat now.
Thank you, everybody. I hope everybody's had some time to read through the amendment. Anybody else wish longer time? Thank you. Can I now invite Councillor Ross to speak to the proposals and to make a statement as Leader of the Council, please.
Thank you very much, Provost. Colleagues, this is the fifth time I've had the honour of presenting a balanced budget to the Council. It's perhaps worth starting with a bit of context. As we approach this important point in the year, I'm sure it's been on every member's mind that our budget comes at a particularly difficult time for so many people in our society. Everyone has been struggling with COVID-19 for the past 2 years, and too many have faced family tragedies, loneliness, and financial problems. At this point, I would like to take a minute to acknowledge the outstanding commitment our Council staff and also those at South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture have given over the last 24 months. They have done everything humanly possible to keep us on track despite the pandemic. In doing so, they have improved and almost certainly saved many lives, and they richly deserve our thanks. I would also like to acknowledge the efforts made by local voluntary organisations. Where would our South Lanarkshire communities be without their humanity? And I can't praise their efforts highly enough. And now, just as we're seeing some light at the end of the tunnel from the pandemic, many of our residents find themselves faced with further hardships. These are caused by increases in the cost of living that are pinching the budgets of every household, notably the huge increase in energy bills. It was in this difficult atmosphere that all the political parties in Council, bar one, came together to work with our dedicated officers to produce a budget that tries to take all of those hardships into account while also safeguarding the Council services. You will all recall that last summer our financial strategy identified a £54 million budget gap for 2022-23. So at that time, this looked like being another difficult budget. However, as outlined in the Revenue Budget Report, thanks to decisions taken by the Council in previous budgets and a number of financial decisions taken by the administration throughout the current year, we find ourselves in a much better position than we feared. I'm happy to report that with the amendment put forward by me today, our budget is now not only balanced and protects council services, it also brings forward a number of new investment initiatives to further strengthen our communities. I'll return to those in a moment, but first I would like to acknowledge those who have made this possible. Once again, we need to thank Paul Manning and his finance department and all the members of the corporate management team who have worked so hard throughout the year to reduce the budget gap. I would also like to offer my thanks to most of my fellow councillors, my SNP colleagues, the Conservatives, the Liberal Democrats and the Independent Group. We all put politics aside to come together for the third year to form a budget working group that was very ably led by co-chairs Margaret Cooper and Maureen Chalmers. Having refused to join at all last year, this time the Labour group did initially take part, but they left the process after only 4 meetings. It's up to them to explain to their constituents why they did that, exactly why they thought it would not be a productive use of their time to participate in the key decisions that will affect every resident in South Lanarkshire. I can only assume they thought it was better for them to carp from the sidelines and produce election leaflets that promise the world, knowing they will never be in a position to deliver on these promises. And I make no apology for making such a political point. I also don't think it's overly political to note how our budget plans were helped by the Scottish Government's additional funding of £120 million for local authorities, and also to acknowledge the further announcement of £150 council tax rebate for every household on bands A to D and those who benefit from council tax reductions. That will have been welcomed in homes throughout South Lanarkshire. The further good news for all of South Lanarkshire council taxpayers is that thanks to our more favourable financial position, the increase to their bills can also be reduced. Last year, a 3.5% increase in council tax was assumed in a financial strategy formulated by officers. Today, our balanced budget includes a 2.5% increase. And I predict that this will be amongst the lowest council tax increases in Scotland this year. And that will mean that South Lanarkshire will still have the lowest council tax on mainland Scotland. Reducing our council tax, of course, has an impact on the income we have available for services. But it's a balancing act. And I am delighted that even after we have offered some relief on council tax, we still have a surplus in the non-recurring additional funds available to us. These will fund the new initiatives and investments I mentioned earlier. These projects were agreed by the cross-party working group after careful consideration of the results of the numerous public consultations we have carried out. And I would like to thank everyone who took part in those consultations. And I want to tell them, your views are really important to us and have helped shape our plans for South Lanarkshire. And here is what you will help us to deliver. First, a priority on valuing volunteers. Volunteers have been the unsung heroes in our communities, especially during the pandemic, but no more. As a lead partner in the Community and Planning and Partnership, we are working with Fastland and other partners to develop a volunteering strategy that will ensure every volunteer is valued. The strategy, led by the experts in the third sector, will provide a coordinated and collaborative approach to recruitment, training and the recognition of volunteers. It will remove barriers to volunteering and develop new opportunities. I'm therefore delighted to announce that we will invest £500,000 in the implementation of this strategy over a 2-year period. Next, on to community-led activities. Each village, town and neighbourhood is unique, with different assets, needs and aspirations. Many of our communities have already developed local plans, and I am confident all have lots of innovative ideas which are just waiting to be unleashed into action. I am therefore delighted to announce that we will invest a further £800,000 to support communities to deliver on their priorities. We look forward to seeing a range of initiatives, ideas to reduce social isolation, to provide access to food, develop public toilet facilities and offer health and wellbeing activities. This funding will also employ a community development worker for 2 years to support community hall management committees develop activities. A grant-based fund will be provided for community halls to improve access to the building, toilet facilities, ensure kitchens have adequate food storage facilities and address any safety concerns. To further support this community work, we will invest another £60,000 to set up and maintain a community wish list scheme, in which communities express wishes and local businesses choose projects to support. These can be fairly modest projects with relatively modest levels of support, but they can make a big difference locally. And this is an excellent way of establishing better connections between local communities and local businesses. All our plans are about improving individual and community wellbeing, and so there's another investment I now want to highlight. We are going to put £300,000 into additional cardio fitness and rehabilitation equipment across a range of South Lanarkshire leisure and culture gyms. This upgraded equipment will help us deliver the outcomes of the Health and Social Care Partnership Strategic Commissioning Plan, whilst also helping SLLC attract new members and promote an active lifestyle that benefits both physical and mental health. We know that the well-being of our children and young people is a priority for residents of South Lanarkshire, and it most certainly is a priority for South Lanarkshire Council. And I'm therefore delighted to announce that we will invest £800,000 to establish a Children and Young Persons Change Fund. We would hope that this investment will help to attract further external funding to support this vital work and will provide additional capacity for low-level interventions at the early years stage. Providing support with everyday routines, addressing parental substance misuse, improving parental skills and offering developmental support for very young children will all help improve life chances. They will address adverse childhood events, reduce referrals to social work and ultimately help reduce the need to accommodate children within the care system. There are two further investments to highlight, both of which tackle issues that all councillors know from their inboxes are very much priorities of our residents in all of our wards. Waste management is a real challenge for some of our communities, and we believe the best way of finding solution to these challenges is for officers and communities to work together, taking a place-based approach. To do this well requires additional resources, and I am delighted that we can invest £682,000 to address 4 specific challenges over the next 2 to 3 years. Food waste in rural areas, recycling in tenement properties, fly tipping in rural areas, and fly tipping in urban areas. And lastly, following the successful participatory budgeting investment in roads and footpaths completed in 2021-22, we will fund a second phase with an investment of £2.5 million. This phase will focus on improvements to pavements, making our towns and villages safer for pedestrians, promoting physical activity and improving the look of our built environment. Again, we will empower our residents to participate in the decision making on how this investment is targeted locally. So there you have it, a multi-million pound programme of investments that will deliver a wide range of services that we know our residents want us to prioritise. Under those
Councillor Ross, you've muted yourself.
Sorry, I'm sure some people would like me to, but I'm going to carry on regardless. On top of those capital programmes that are outlined in other reports before us today, As those papers outline, in 2022-23, this council will invest just over 82 million through our General Services Capital Investment Programme and a further 52.23 million through our Housing Capital Programme. That's investment in roads, libraries, community alarms, school expansion projects and active travel, and more money to improve central heating, better windows and insulation to help council tenants reduce bills and help tackle the climate emergency. These substantial programmes represent our absolute commitment to the people of South Lanarkshire to invest in their future, creating infrastructure that supports jobs, generates economic improvement and prosperity, and benefits the lives of those who live here. Provost, as I said at the start of my speech, these are extremely difficult times we're living in. But thanks to the efforts of our officers and those elected members who took part in the budget working group, we have done everything possible to protect and strengthen our communities. We have a balanced budget. We have used funding from the Scottish Government to reduce council tax increases while still protecting council services. And we have a number of exciting investments that we firmly believe will help households through the hardest of times and confirm South Lanarkshire as a fantastic place in which to live. Provost, colleagues, I am positive that this budget, amended and outlined by me today, represents the best use of our council finances on behalf of our citizens. And I am pleased on behalf of the administration and cross-party working group to commend it to council. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Ross. I understand another amendment has been received, but in the meantime, I intend to hear from Councillor Cooper, Councillor Allison and Councillor McKeever, who are speaking on behalf of their groups, and they will thereafter hear the amendment. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Provost. It's my pleasure to second the budget proposals that have been tabled by the council leader. As John noted, I was co-chair of the cross-party budget working group, a role that I have now undertaken 3 years in a row. Once again, it was hard work, but very meaningful and rewarding, as I worked alongside political leaders who were intent on achieving the best outcomes for South Lanarkshire constituents. John Ross is to be congratulated on being among the first at the table to negotiate on priorities, as we all did to assist us in reaching agreement. In fact, I think that creating and maintaining that working group has been a significant achievement in itself for our council. It has allowed us to come together to build a consensus budget that puts our residents first by working out how we can best protect the services that they rely on day in, day out. In an ideal world, as happened 3 years ago, all political groups would have taken part in the working group to deliver a unanimous budget. But it is perhaps that was just too much to hope for just a couple of months ahead of the council elections. But it is to the huge credit of the 4 groups that did participate that they rose to the challenge and have delivered a good result for the people of South Lanarkshire. I want to thank all who took part, my fellow independent councillors, the SNP group, Conservatives and Lib Dems. I also want to thank the hard-working team of officers who provided financial reports and guidance promptly and in great detail. A couple of people deserve special recognition. My co-chair of the working group, Councillor Maureen Chalmers, and also Councillor Robert Brown, who as ever had some very constructive input into the discussions, always a voice of moderation and conciliation. Sometimes as I sought to mediate, I felt I was negotiating with the Kremlin, but in the end, everyone brought their troops back from the border, unlike the Kremlin, and we reached a solid resolution. The council leader has already run through the highlights of the budget that we have delivered through those lengthy and detailed conversations. And I agree with John that we can all be proud that we managed to reduce the council tax increase from the 3.5% that at one point looked likely. These are times of many economic and social pressures, and from the outset, the independent group wanted to see a reasonable and more affordable rise in council tax in these difficult times, and I believe we have achieved this by reaching consent on 2.5%. One that protects vital services without adding to people's burdens at a time when living costs are going up. And on that, I believe we have delivered. The Independence Group's other priorities were a recovery programme that will sort out pavements and make them safe to walk on, a meaningful support programme for the elderly, reducing social isolation through the use of our volunteers, a young people's fund that focuses at various levels on mental health, meaningful ways of tackling the blight of fly tipping, and support for the recovery of South Lanarkshire leisure and culture. I am proud that all of these aspirations have been made a reality in the budget we are considering today. Thanks to the range of new investments we have been able to fund, all of those priorities will lead to meaningful improvements in the lives of local people. At the end of the day, I believe that is what the role of a councillor is about, improving the lives of our constituents with the strategic eye on the future financial position of our council as we move forward. This budget does exactly that, and I recommend it to all of my colleagues across all the political groups. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you, Councillor Keeper. We'll now hear from the Conservative Group Leader, Councillor Allison, please.
Thank you, Provost. I'm left wondering who Margaret considers it was Putin in the discussions regarding the budget. I must also concur with a lot of what John was saying, the leader was saying about the officers. To take this down from, I think, a starting position of 50 million to nearly balanced before the members got involved, I think was quite should really be highlighted on the excellent work that they did. And that's not a one-off, because, as again has already been said, we have the lowest council tax in mainland Scotland. That is because of year on year and year of good budgeting by officers and being able to identify how to run their businesses, how to run the business. None of us would have proposed this budget in the working group if we'd been left it up to our own. But I don't think that's a negative. I actually believe it's a good sign and positive, because it means that all of us have represented our constituents and been able to come together and produce a balanced budget. I have to say as well, though, that the process would have been much easier if the council grant had been raised along the lines of the block grant to Scottish Government. But I also acknowledge the work of council leaders in COSLA to be able to gain the extra funding that has allowed us to find a way forward. It was important to us that we supported all our constituents. It is a difficult time, bills are rising, and the fact that we have been able to hold the council tax to 2.5% when inflation is nearer 5% was very important to us, and we're pleased that that has been able to be in this budget statement. The extra funding has also allowed us to go through. I'm not going into them in detail as John and Margaret have, but it was very important that the young people well-being was supported. That was in the back of a motion that we put to council. Pavements were also important as well, and the environmental challenges through fly tipping, etc., do need to be addressed, and we're pleased that they're going to be. The final one within there that we were strong on was the toilet position. It sounds like a small thing, but they've been led to some very unsightly situations, particularly in the rural communities where there is no alternatives, no supermarket to go into where they're provided. So it is essential that we address that particular situation. The other items on on the amendment today, we are pleased to be able to support, because they...
Councillor Allison, we've lost you.
Sorry. So
Okay.
That's what happens when I mute my headphones, Provost. Because of all the above, we are able to support this budget today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll hear from Councillor McGeever, who's speaking on behalf of the Liberal Democrats now, please.
Thank you very much, Provost. It's always a challenge for different political parties and groups to find enough common ground over something as significant as the annual budget. We do have very genuinely held differences over policies and how to deliver for our communities, but we also know that we have a responsibility to put the needs of our people first before politics. This agreement follows a huge amount of discussion and debate. It reflects a willingness to consider each other's proposals and each other's concerns. And I think it came about because there was a genuine determination to achieve the best possible outcome, something that does benefit everyone in South Lanarkshire. My Liberal Democrat group went into these talks with a very clear view that much more has to be done on some key areas in particular. We need to sort the state of pavements, to help people with the cost of living crisis, to support our local businesses that have been hammered by 2 years of pretty tough restrictions, the toughest restrictions in living memory and probably far beyond that too. To assist children and young people who have suffered probably more than any of us have through the last 2 years, to improve and defend our local environment, and of course to protect all of our vital local public services. This agreement does meet those crucial goals, and it shows what can be done when opponents work constructively. Yes, fighting hard for our own beliefs, but also understanding that there is no monopoly in good ideas. Like others have said, I would like to thank the officers for their hard work. It's very genuinely appreciated, and it is remarkable what has been achieved. I'd also like to specifically note the role played by the chairs of the cross-party working group, Councillor Cooper and Councillor Chalmers. They have made huge efforts to keep the process on track, and that really should be recognised publicly. Of course, this agreement is not perfect. The Liberal Democrats believe local government in this country is far too often held back from taking the actions that it needs to take on behalf of its communities, the communities it knows best. Far too much of the far too little funding that councils get is tied for use as ministers in Edinburgh want, rather than in specific local needs determined by local councillors. Good local government needs much more flexibility to deliver, the right to choose, the ability to genuinely shape services to fit the needs of the towns, districts and villages, which are not the same across Scotland. The truth is, and I think we all agree, that one size does not fit all. It's no secret that my party feels strongly that the Scottish and UK government should both do more for local businesses and communities, and that they should allow councils to freely determine how to use far more of what we spend. But that said, this is still a good agreement. Within the scope of our powers, we have delivered the best possible outcome, and that is no small achievement. For the Liberal Democrats, we would like to thank the others here for considering our views and for finding agreement wherever it was possible. We in particular welcome the willingness to find so much more money for pavements and for footpaths. Injuries like broken bones, they can be absolutely devastating for people. They result in long hospital stays and complex surgeries. They produce lasting immobility and pain, post-operative complications and infections, and the loss of independence. They hammer family incomes. They can ruin or even take, in some cases, lives. They also leave a massive burden on our overstretched NHS. We will always work with anybody to sort this issue out, and I'm glad that significant extra money has been found for pavements and footpaths. We hope that in the years to come, this agreement on the issue will grow and deepen, and that the Liberal Democrat group's goals for prioritising safe walking routes will be achieved by the council as a whole. Now, what we want to say is that this budget certainly makes a difference. It certainly makes that a priority, and that's why we will be supporting it today. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you so much, Councillor McGeever. Councillor Fagan, I understand you've submitted an amendment, another amendment?
Yes, Provost. I think that should be getting circulated now.
Thank you so much. Can I confirm that it's seconded by Councillor Convery? Councillor Convery?
Yes, that's correct, Provost.
Thank you. Can I also confirm with Paul Manning that you've had sight of this amendment?
Just, I suppose, to take each in turn, Provost, on the amendment submitted by Councillor Ross, seconded by Councillor Cooper. I've reviewed that and I've established in the context of this as a budget paper, it's financially competent. In terms of Councillor Fagan's amendment, seconded by Councillor Convery, again, I've taken the opportunity to review that. And again, in the context of this as a budget paper, I can confirm that that's financially competent.
Thank you very much. Susan, can you confirm that it's now been circulated, the second amendment? Susan, can you confirm it's been circulated?
Sorry, Provost, I didn't realise I was in mute. Yes, I've sent an email and I'm just currently making sure it's populated into the chat.
Thank you so much. We've been going for about an hour, so I'm going to take a recess until, let's say, 11:15 to allow members to take a comfort break and also to view the second amendment. Thank you. Please, just to make sure everybody's back.
Certainly, Provost. When I had a quick check, it looks like Councillor Campbell has now joined the meeting, but we seem to not have Councillor Burns, but I'm certainly happy to take it again just to double check that fact.
If you would, please. Thank you.
We have Councillor Allison, Councillor Anderson, Councillor Bradley, Councillor Brogan, Councillor Brown, Councillor Buchanan, Councillor Burns. I'm just double checking. He seems to have left the meeting, but I'll come back to his name at the end. Councillor Caliques, Councillor Callaghan had given her apologies. Councillor Campbell, you're now with us, yes?
I am here. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
Susan, just can I check? Can I vote on this because it was late?
Yes, it's not a quasi judicial, so yes, you can. Do you have access to both amendments?
I do indeed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We have Councillor Carmichael, Councillor Chalmers, Councillor Convery, Councillor Cooper, Councillor Corbett, Councillor Cowie, Councillor Craig, Councillor Devlin, Councillor Donnelly, Councillor Dorman, Councillor Dryborough, Councillor Fagan, and I'll just open it up for the more names, just a second. Councillor Faulkner, Councillor Ferguson, Councillor Fulton, Councillor Gray, Councillor Greenshields, Councillor Hamilton, Councillor Harrow, Councillor Holford, Councillor Horn, Councillor Horsham, Councillor Hose, Councillor LeBlond, Councillor Lennon, Councillor Lockhart, Councillor Logan, Councillor Loudon, Councillor Lowe, Councillor MacDonald, Councillor Marsh, Councillor McAdams, Provost, Councillor McClymont, Councillor McGavigan, Councillor McGeever, Councillor McGuigan, Councillor McLaughlin, Councillor Miller, Councillor Nealon, Councillor Nelson, Councillor Nugent, Councillor Razak, Councillor Ross, Councillor Scott and Shearer, Councillor Stevenson, Councillor Thompson, Councillor Walker, Councillor Wartall, Councillors Wark, Watson and Wilson.
Thank you, Susan. Thanks very much indeed. I hope members have an opportunity to look at the second amendment. If so, can I now ask Councillor Fagan to speak, please?
Thank you, Provost. I said last year that a camel is a horse designed by committee. It was a metaphor for last year's budget, and I have to say I think it's a useful metaphor for this cross-party amendment too. I also said last year that there's no progressive majority on this council without the Labour Party, and that is evident again today. Every year I've been on the council, the Labour group has made a decision about the best way Labour councillors can advance Labour priorities. We've worked with other parties before. We have voted for budgets, against budgets. We've abstained, we have amended. We have done every year what we judge to be right in the circumstances. We are prepared to compromise, but we are not prepared to be compromised. Open debate about ideas, principles and priorities should be the norm when budgets are set. There is, frankly, a conspiracy of complacency in this council that seeks to make it the exception. I would also join others in thanking the workers and communities who have gone above and beyond throughout the pandemic and the officials for all their work in getting the budget to this point. But I have to make the following points about the reality of the ongoing funding crisis in local government. There is still a like-for-like grant reduction in this budget. The Scottish budget this year is not the restorative budget councils or our workforces need. The council is receiving no assistance to pay the £3.5 million bill for national insurance contributions, and the £7 million in one-off expenditure that all groups today are debating how best to use is just that. It's one-off. It's not recurring, and it will not be baselined into the local government settlement. COSLA said this year's settlement was barely survivable. To the credit of council leaders, including our own, a joint letter was issued to the Scottish Government condemning the settlement. But after 5 years of silence and subservience from this administration, it is frankly too little, too late, and today the leader reverted to type, thanking the Scottish Government for hammering the council budget a little less, not demanding the transformative change we need in our communities. And let me say to the entire council that Labour will always fight for South Lanarkshire's fair share. Now I want to turn to the amendment that I put forward. Labour wrote to all group leaders and set out 3 tests for this budget. Does it deliver a cash injection into frontline services? Does it take action on the cost of living crisis? And does it deliver budget transparency? Frankly, the cross-party working group proposals do not meet those tests. And I want to focus at the outset on budget transparency. The administration were elected on a manifesto which promised to increase transparency and openness. People will recall that it's become a running joke. To introduce a new culture of openness, transparency and accessibility. And wait for it, to end the era of control by a handful of senior councillors taking decisions behind closed doors. The way in which this budget has been developed marks a departure from previous years, even previous years in which there were cross-party talks. There has been no paper to the council or committee updating us on budget strategy since the summer, and that means there has been no paper in the public domain updating us on budget strategy since the summer. There is a place, obviously, for confidential briefings, and there is a place for political working groups, but those working groups are voluntary, they are not formalised, and they should not affect the level of budget information that is made available to all councillors, including the backbenchers of the groups that choose to participate. Our amendment proposes that within 9 months, a procedure is set out formalising the stages through which the council makes its budget, and that process should recognise the fundamental role of councillors and the importance of transparency. The cross-party working group in Leisure and Culture supported the reconstitution of South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture Trust, but the trust has yet to be reconstituted. Its relationship with the council has yet to be reset. We heard about that earlier in the meeting. Its relationship with the council has not yet been reset, and yet the development of these papers, there has been an assumption that the council would have less of a role in the oversight of their budget and their services, and this is a trust that is funded with council money. Were it not for the fortunately timed transfer of almost £1 million proposed today, the trust would have to make substantial cuts. And on the current direction of travel, elected councillors would have little to no say on those decisions, little to no oversight of those decisions. And that is another departure from previous years. Our amendment proposes that a new procedure is also brought forward to clarify the role of the council and the democratic role of councillors in the oversight of the relationship between the council and the trust. And I want to stress why that's important. Proposals to close facilities, even if they are just officers' proposals, have only ever been considered because of the long-term financial challenges faced by the trust and local government as a whole. Budgets are not getting any better, the pressure to close facilities has not gone away, and if we are not careful, we could be delegating to the trust the power to remove services from our council-owned facilities without the consent of democratically elected councillors. The council would still own the facilities, but those facilities would be empty. So there has to be democratic oversight, there has to be clarity, there has to be an agreement that prevents that from happening. And let me also say in passing that the funding made available in the cross-party amendment to deal with the issue of accessibility will not scratch the surface. We need capital investment on a sustained basis, not the capital grant cuts imposed in this council by the SNP government. We're also in this amendment today setting out how we propose to use the £7 million of one-off funding, investing £3.2 million in frontline services with £1 million ring-fenced for facilities, grounds and waste services to clean up and maintain our communities, to address the explosion and complaints about rats and fly tipping under the SNP. We're proposing to put in place an additional free waste uplift going further than this cross-party budget. And we are proposing a cost of living action plan of over £3 million to keep the council tax rise down to 2.2% in line with the housing rents the council has already approved. a £100 cash boost for local families in need using the school clothing grant again as a vehicle for doing so, and £100,000 to help eligible older people and vulnerable people in South Lanarkshire install interlinked fire alarms. The rollout of the new fire regulations has been a shambles. Budgets to help the vulnerable have been maxed out, and the advice I'm receiving is that they will be again. So I think there is a compelling case for the council to step in. This amendment by no means sets out the extent of Labour's ambitions for the council. That will come soon. Fundamentally, this is an attempt to establish a consensus on how decisions are made and to show that frontline services and the cost of living crisis must be our priority for this year and for this budget. We accept the numerical reality of where votes lie in the council today, but we will soon have the chance to change that reality, to end 5 years of drift and decline and bring new leadership to our council. For now, I ask the council to support the Labour amendment.
Councillor Fagan. Councillor Convery, do you wish to speak?
Thank you. No, thank you, Provost. My group said it very eloquently. Thank you.
Sorry, you're a bit distorted there, Councillor Convery. Can you just maybe repeat that, please?
Yes, what I said, Provost, was the leader of my group, the Labour group, said it very, very eloquently. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Before we move on, can I ask if there are any other amendments, please? No. Okay, thank you. Can I ask members if anyone is moving the officers' recommendations? No. Thank you. And finally, can I ask members if they wish to debate the amendments or move to the vote? Councillor Robert Brown.
Yes, thank you very much, Provost. I want to make a few observations, if I may, in support of the administration's proposals today. And I want to begin really by saying that the process we've actually gone through in the council, despite Joe Fagan's fairly unconvincing comments on this, is something of a trailblazer for other councils, a budget negotiation conducted with goodwill and in the public interest by all the parties except Labour, and one which arguably produces a better settlement than the proposals of one party alone. Now, it is against the background of continued squeeze by Scottish Government on council finances, mitigated certainly to a degree by the last-minute £7 million supplement, whose value is reduced by the fact that it's not mainstreamed. And there does remain, as Mark McGeever said earlier, an urgent need to stabilise council revenues on a basis that can sustain vital services and local democratic accountability. It's something of a paradox, isn't it, that the SNP government, so keen to moan about power grabs from London, seem remarkably keen on themselves hoovering up power and influence and finance from councils. And it's been a wonder to behold SNP council administrations across Scotland waking up to that reality. I want to say a word on a couple of other things. Firstly, to support particularly the Children and Young People's Fund. I don't want to say too much more about that, but I do regard the issue of speech and language therapy and communication issues that young people starting school in particular are quite often subject to, and which handicap their potential education in the future. But the other main focus in the budget, of course, is tackling pavements. Now, the Liberal Democrats are sometimes derided for pavement politics, but in truth, the state of our pavements is not just a major problem in itself, but is at the heart of many agendas. Walking and cycling are more difficult if the pavements aren't safe. Frail elderly people are less independent if they can't walk to the local shop or hairdresser without risking a fall. People in wheelchairs are at risk if there are no lowered curbs at crossing points. There are more weeds and more weed killer needed if the asphalt is at all cracked and broken. If we are to do PB again, let's provide sensible options where people can rank whether safer crossings at junctions, lowered curbs for wheelchairs, getting rid of puddles that soak pedestrians, or clearing blocked gullies or resurfacing the pavement are their top priorities. Can I finish by saying a word on the Labour Party? Now, the Labour Party's objections to the process, in my view, are trivial and unconvincing. Everyone and their dog knows that Labour are the only party in this chamber who've had no influence whatever on the budget. In a council of minorities, they've achieved the very difficult task of making the biggest opposition party irrelevant. And just by way of an example, they're proposing to allow people a second free waste uplift, a meritorious proposal in itself, except for the fact that the actual charge on waste uplifts was brought in by the last Labour administration themselves. It does seem a little odd that this is one of their priorities. I don't think there's actually very much in the Labour budget. It doesn't actually say all that much. There's not much by way of new ideas. There's not much by way of anything different. And to some extent, it echoes some of the things in the administration's budget as well. This is a good budget. It does the best in difficult circumstances that we can do. And it provides, I think, for the citizens of South Lanarkshire, something which I think will be helpful going forward. It doesn't change the world, but it helps. Finally, if I may, I'd like to pay tribute to Councillor Margaret Cooper, who in particular, I think, has led and shown leadership in the way that she's actually conducted the negotiations on this matter, kept the thing on the road and taken it forward. And I think in actual fact, we've ended up with a motion, a reasonably concise motion in the name of the Leader of the Administration, supported by the main opposition parties except Labour, which in fact is satisfactory and worth supporting. I beg for your support for the motion. Thank you very much, Lord Provost.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Councillor Fiona Driver, please.
Thank you, Provost. Whilst I'm not standing for election next year, I'm really proud of what's been achieved by being part of this council for 5 years. And today we've seen a budget proposal and amendment by the cross-party working group. It's taken a lot of time and work by all parties and none, with the exception of the Labour Party. Now, surprisingly, whilst Labour were happy to take part in discussions in some previous years, they then decided that there were no playing, and as it were, and unfortunately for them, they didn't have the ball when they left. And in fact, they appear to have dropped the ball. They may be chasing some media headlines that they feel in an election year will help their chances, but for the rest of us, working together has provided a budget that is people and not headlines at its heart. And I know Councillor Fagan rattled on about openness and transparency, yet the first I had sight of their budget proposal was actually at this meeting. So £2.5 million for pavements is a Lib Dem proposal that's massively important, not only to us, but to so many people in South Lanarkshire. This investment is badly needed and will enable so many folks to get around easier. Only last week, my mum had a fall on a pavement, and at 78, the recovery is not speedy. The operation to rebuild an ankle with plates and screws is painful and will, cease her mobility for some time. But this budget also provides a children and young people change fund to include early years communication and mental health issues. And this budget values volunteers and community-led initiatives. Where would we be without the voluntary sector? Charities and voluntary groups can achieve so many things that the statutory sector just cannot achieve. And these are all things that change people's lives. Now, I personally had requested money, for the repair and the replacement of 60 Mugas that are not fit for purpose. And yet, as part of a cross-party group, that was not something that was successful, but there is funding for communities, and that may well be a choice in certain areas that they make to replace their local Muga, giving local people the power to decide what their priorities are. So I fully support the amendment that has been put forward by Councillor John Ross.
Thank you, Councillor Driver. Councillor Alan Faulkner, please.
Thanks, Provost. I mean, I laugh, Riley, we talk about the budget working party. There's one thing, isn't it? It's about democracy. I mean, we've got leaders and deputy leaders. If we take Margaret Cooper, if we take Robert Brown, who represent 10 councillors between them, 9 of whom have jumped ship for the last election, stood in the manifesto, which they're like, I put your finger up, Triborough. So that's a point. There's no democracy. But the point I want to bring up, and John Ross raised that, and Margaret Cooper, was social isolation, especially for elderly people. We have a social work department who are determined to shut the day centres that provide a service for elderly people. We've put £800,000 into that. We've spent £8.7 million in the capital receipts, £1.6 million in staff for a £10 million white elephant in Blantyre with 20 beds for people who've been clinically discharged from hospital and are fit to go home. And yet we're talking about £800,000 that presents social isolation. And we need to direct our social work department to retain daycare centres, both for the elderly and for younger adults. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you very much. Councillor Wardhall, please.
Labour have made a point of that this budget was created by a few people in isolation. And the fact is that after every meeting of the budget committee, the groups referred things that were discussed back to their own groups, and came to a consensus with their own groups, which was then brought back to the budget group. The only councillors that were excluded from the process were self-excluded, and that was the Labour group. And I think the impression that, half a dozen or 10 councillors, whatever, created this budget is a myth. This budget was discussed by the majority of councillors at numerous times, at numerous meetings. The Labour group were the only group who did not participate, and they self-excluded. I would support the leader, the budget proposed by the leader.
Thank you very much. Councillor John Ross.
Yeah, thanks, Provost. I'm not going to say too much here. I go along with some of the comments that have been made by people in support of the budget. I think Labour are grasping at straws here. I've already replied to Joe on the basis of clarity and transparency, an answer to that. And I honestly think that discussion should be stopped and we should go to the vote. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Councillor Alec Allison.
Thanks, Provost. Just really coming in with the others, having a look through the Labour proposal. 2.2 looks good, but it's always easy when you know that it's not going to be successful. And being in the room and being able to get a negotiation is to something that will happen is very much more important. If we'd pulled out, I would probably, knowing that we wouldn't have got anything, suggested a zero rise and made the budget fit to that. So I can see what Joe's looking to do, but yeah, our group were fully involved in the discussions. There are other things they would have liked, but as I said, this is a council budget, not a Conservative, SNP, independent or Liberal budget. And therefore I am going with what I think is now becoming the motion, which is the First Amendment.
Thank you. Councillor Bert Thompson.
I'll make it very brief, Provost, and let's get to the motion. Just to say that I obviously back Joe there. I think what it has, and they're a wee bit in SNP as well, my priorities are about the young, vulnerable and elderly, and there's a wee bit of that with SNP and certainly a lot for Labour. I think they're roads and pavements. I've been campaigning for the last year, so somebody secretly listening to me. I don't know how, but thanks for that. I don't think it goes far enough. I think it needs even more money in that. But thanks anyway for letting me have a word there.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. I think we are moving to vote soon, but I'll hear from Councillor Margaret Cooper, followed by Councillor Margaret Walker.
Thanks, Provost. I think it's extremely disingenuous of Councillor Faulkner speaking on behalf of the Labour group to say that he's talking about democracy. It's hardly democratic to exclude smaller groups within the council from taking part in the general budget discussions. We all have a democratic vote and right to contribute to the budget discussions. And I can't understand Councillor Faulkner's reasoning when he speaks on behalf of the Labour group that he would exclude, for example, the Lib Dems and the Independents from those discussions and from the democratic right to influence and vote on the budget. Thanks, Provost. I think we should move to the proper.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Finally, can we hear from Councillor Margaret Walker, please?
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, I support Councillor Fagan's amendment. What I would say in terms of the kind of last minute addition of the money, and in terms of it being a one-off, and in terms of the Children's Change Fund, in relation to frontline services, the reason that we have the situation we have with 2-year waiting lists for mental health services and various other services for young people has been the complete failure of the Scottish Government to adequately invest in local authorities to allow them to actually fund those services and fund the frontline services. And the only way that we will ever get back to a situation where we are able to tackle the mental health issues that unfortunately are risen, and even more so in the last 2 years, and particularly levels of poverty as well, which impacts horrendously in young people, is to fund frontline services. And quite frankly, for the Scottish Government to come up with this at the last minute as one-offs that won't be recurring payments, that won't lead to a substantial improvement to the level that we need in terms of public services, is utterly inadequate to deal with the financial situation that local authorities are in. I seem to remember, I think it was one of the other councillors for the Conservative Party, making a very heartfelt plea in relation and in response to his constituents with young people who couldn't get access to any mental health services, many of which are still online. And when we get back here, we need to actually tackle that. Because we still have a lot of services that are still online at the moment and that aren't providing the quality of service that we should be. But the way to tackle that is to put adequate funding into frontline services, and that's why this amendment proposes that the substantial amount goes into frontline services to enable them to provide the services that children and young people need. The voluntary sector, while welcome, is an enhancement and should be in addition to, not at the cost of funding statutory frontline services to children and young people, and as Councillor Faulkner said, to other vulnerable groups in our society. And this government, and through that, the lack of funding to local authorities, has spectacularly failed to do that on a level that's quite frankly incomprehensible and unacceptable. So on that basis, I think the amendment that the Labour group at least goes some way to tackling that and using some of the additional funding, and I sincerely hope that we are able to, continue that in a position of power, and that we actually can fight for better funding and actually get funding that allows us to provide the services that we should be to our community, because we've spectacular failed to do that in terms of the funding settlements for local government and the inflexibility therein. So thank you, Chair, thank you, Provost, for allowing me to say that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. I'm very keen to move to a vote, but finally I will hear from Councillor Richard Nelson, then we will move to the vote, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just in Councillor Walker's part there about the children and young people motion that was brought forward was actually brought forward by myself, as you know. Part of the conversation during the cross-party working group was a lot to do about mental health and children's mental health, and that's why we stayed in the room. We stayed in the room to get the best for the people within South Lanarkshire. Is it enough? No, it's probably not. Is it going somewhere? Yes, it is. We are doing something that we can try to do something with the powers that we have. Yes, I agree. We need more money from the Scottish Government. We need the Scottish Government to do more, because this was just not COVID driven. This was there before COVID. So yes, I do agree, but I'm not one to take party political lines. If the Labour group wanted to do something, they should have sat in the room with us and discussed this, and we could have came to some agreement and some consensus, and I think that would have been the best way to do it. The money that will be put there will be getting discussed as it goes forward, and to make sure it is going to the right place at the right time. Again, if you would have been in the room and heard that, you would have probably discussed and listened to a wee bit more of it. Thank you, Provost.
Thank you very much indeed, and thanks to all members for that debate. I can now confirm there are two amendments. Councillor Ross's amendment is now regarded as the motion, and Councillor Fagan's is the amendment. Can I invite the clerk to take the vote, please?
Thank you, Provost. If everyone's clear then in the motion and amendment, I'll read out your names, and if you can please indicate whether you wish to vote for the motion or the amendment. Councillor Allison?
Motion.
Councillor Anderson?
Motion.
Councillor Bradley?
Motion.
Councillor Brogan?
Amendment.
Councillor Brown?
A motion.
Councillor Buchanan?
Motion.
Councillor Callaghes?
Motion.
Councillor Campbell?
Motion.
Councillor Carmichael?
Amendment.
Councillor Chalmers?
Motion.
Councillor Convery?
Amendment.
Councillor Cooper?
Motion.
Councillor Corbett?
Motion.
Councillor Cowie?
Amendment.
Councillor Craig?
Motion.
Councillor Devlin?
Amendment.
Councillor Donnelly?
Motion.
Councillor Dorman?
Motion.
Councillor Dryborough?
Motion.
Councillor Fagan?
Amendment.
Councillor Faulkner?
Amendment.
Councillor Ferguson?
Motion.
Thank you. Councillor Fulton. Sorry, Councillor Fulton.
Motion.
Motion, thank you. Councillor Gray.
Motion.
Councillor Greenshields.
Motion.
Councillor Hamilton.
Amendment.
Councillor Harrow.
Motion.
Councillor Holford.
Motion.
Councillor Horn.
Motion.
Councillor Horsham.
Motion.
Councillor Hose.
Motion.
Councillor LeBlond.
Motion.
Councillor Lennon.
Amendment.
Councillor Lockhart.
Motion.
Councillor Logan.
Amendment.
Councillor Loudon.
Motion.
Councillor Lowe. Councillor Lowe. I think you're in mute. Are you able to give your vote?
Motion.
Thank you. Councillor MacDonald.
Motion.
Councillor Marsh.
Motion.
Councillor McAdams.
Amendment.
Provost.
Motion.
Councillor McClymont.
Amendment.
Councillor McGavigan.
Motion.
Councillor McGeever.
Motion.
Councillor McGuigan.
Motion.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Amendment.
Councillor Miller.
Motion.
Councillor Nealon.
Motion.
Councillor Nelson.
Motion.
Councillor Nugent.
Motion.
Councillor Razak.
Amendment.
Councillor Ross.
Motion.
Councillor Scott.
Amendment.
Councillor Shearer.
Motion.
Councillor Stevenson.
Motion.
Councillor Thompson.
Amendment.
Councillor Walker.
Amendment.
Councillor Wardhaw.
Motion.
Councillor Wark.
Motion.
Councillor Watson.
Motion.
Councillor Wilson.
Motion.
Thanks, I'll just tally that up. I got 44 for the motion and 17 for the amendment. The motion is therefore declared carried.
Thank you very much indeed, Susan. We now move on to item 3, recommendations referred by the Executive Committee, Housing, Revenue and Capital Account Budget 2022-23, which is on pages 28 of your papers. Can I invite Danny Lowe to speak to the report, please?
Thanks, Provost. So this report references a recommendation from the recent Executive Committee that was held on the 2nd of February 2022. It relates to the Housing Revenue and Capital Account Budget for 2022-23, and that had been previously been considered and endorsed at a Special Housing and Technical Resources Committee on the 19th of January 2022. At these previous meetings, members were advised that council officers would be working closely with the Tenants Budget Scrutiny Group over the final few months of 2021, and that was to develop a set of proposals in respect to the proposed rent rise for 2022-23, and also to consider the investment priorities for the year ahead. So the proposals put forward for 2022-23 were prepared in line with the 30-year Housing Revenue Account Business Plan, and the reason for that was to make sure that we remain in a stable financial footing going forward whilst meeting our service delivery and investment requirements. And the most important thing is, at the same time as doing all that, we need to make sure that we keep our rents affordable for our tenants. So the committees were advised that due to the ongoing uncertainty which was caused by the COVID pandemic, and similar to last year, tenants were again supportive of moving away from the established multi-year approach and instead work again to a one-year increase of 2.2%, which continues to acknowledge the financial uncertainty which faces tenants at this time. On the basis of the 2.2% increase being proposed, the investment priorities which have also been proposed for the year ahead continue in a similar theme to previous years, and a £52.230 million programme is being proposed in that regard. In the earlier reports, again, members were advised of the consultation that is taking place around the budget and rent setting process, and there was positive feedback in relation to that and support from both the Budget Scrutiny Group and the Tenants Participation Coordination Group on the 2.2% one-year rent increase that has been proposed. It was considered that provided good value for the tenants whilst allowing continued investment, which is really important too. And it was stated at the closing event by the tenants' representatives that the proposed increase was fair, and it also ensured that tenants' rents remained affordable for most tenants. Members have today therefore been asked to approve the recommendation in section 2 of the report, which are firstly that the proposed rent increase to 2.2% is approved, and secondly, based on this, the proposed capital programme for 2022-23, which totals £52.23 million, is also approved. Thanks, Provost.
Thank you, Danny. Are there any questions or comments? Can I confirm that members approve the recommendations on page 25? Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you so much. Item 4, 2022-2023 Capital Programme Update, pages 29 to 42. Can I invite Paul Manning to speak to the report, please?
Thank you, Provost. So the Director of Housing has obviously gone through the Housing Capital Programme, and the purpose of this paper is to provide the Council with a proposed General Services Capital Programme for next year for 22-23. Now, I'll cut to the recommendation first. What it talks about is a programme totalling £82.284 million, and that's in Appendix 3. So I'll just briefly take you through the stages that get us to that level of programme. And what the paper does is build up the programme, again, in a number of phases, and they're really summarised in the table that you can see on page 31. And what I'll do is I'll just go through some of the more consequential elements that fit into that table and that take us to that overall programme of £82.25 million. And the first of these is covered 4.2 on that first page of the paper. So it talks about ongoing programmes of work. Now, by and large, these are things which have been in capital programmes for a number of years. There's a reference there to the appendix. It goes through those in detail, and you'll recognise some of the bigger elements in that. So, for example, there's a proposal in there that £10 million goes towards a roads programme, nearly £2 million going towards schools ICT, and nearly £5 million going towards property maintenance projects. So that's these ongoing programmes which have found a home in previous programmes that are part of this £82 million. After that, at 4.3, we talk about new priorities that are identified. And again, you can pick up the detail of them in the appendices. Two significant items in there: community alarm replacements. Now, this is a piece of work that's going to have to be done as we move from analogue telephone systems that these alarms currently run on to a digital network, right? So there's a proposal in there that money's put in order to allow that to happen. There's also money in there for match funding for external funding bids. So you'll see in the background and in the appendix, the levelling up fund is referred to in that. The other significant item that's in there, it says 21-22 net movements. So again, a large value of money in there, just shy of £46 million. Now those are amounts that have moved from capital programme in year 21-22 into the programme for year 22-23. And these are things that have been reported to the Executive Committee across the period of this year and last year as well. So they form the core of this year's capital programme too. Now, what that takes us to, and this is summarised at 4.10, And as I say, it's laid out on a project by project, resource by resource basis in Appendix 3 on page 37 of your papers is that programme of £82.284 million. And to go back to that recommendation, what the paper looks for is approval of that programme. Provost, thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Are there any questions or comments, please? No. Can I confirm that the members approve the recommendation on page 29?
Provost.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Thompson.
Thanks very much, your Provost. I thought it was at home there being ignored. I'd just like to ask Paul if, and maybe I've missed it, so I'll just ask for confirmation about Blantyre Leisure Centre. I know it has on several occasions been put on the capital programme, then moved or disappeared due to different circumstances. Can you give us any update on that, or maybe not at this meeting if you haven't got it, but maybe email me. Thanks very much, Provost.
Provost, I'm happy to pick that up. In terms of an update, I know we did recently correspond, Councillor Thompson, on this, and I'm happy to come back with that again and pick that up in further detail. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Councillor Alex Allison.
Yeah, no surprise, I'm going to mention bridges, Provost. Clyde Bridge, I'm pleased to hear we have found a way forward. In here, though, it's 2.837 million that has been identified. I think it might be helpful for members if there was clarity on how, if we can, how that is going to be funded when there's only that amount in the capital budget. I'm also looking at Pretts Mill Bridge at £15,000, which does not seem to be a great deal of money for the work that is going to be required on that bridge. I'm wondering if we could have some comment on that, please, Paul.
Again, just via the Provost, in terms of Clyde Bridge, I think elected members are aware that there was a Section 36C report completed, right, which outlines the transfer of budget to the Clyde Bridge project. Now, just taking things in sequence, that's now in the papers for the Executive Committee for next Wednesday, and those were issued yesterday evening. So if you go to those papers, they're available online. You can see where the budget's coming from and the amount of money that's pulled together for that. So that will go to the Executive Committee next week, where it will be ratified, and thereafter the programme will be adjusted, Councillor Allison. In terms of Pretts Mill Bridge, I would need part of what underpins this 2022-23 programme is what we believe will be spent in year 2022-23. So if you indulge me offline, I will pick up what the situation is with that bridge, what that funding's intended for, and what the overall plans are for the bridge, and come back to you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Paul. Councillor Alan Faulkner.
Thanks, Provost. Two questions for Paul. Page 38, Social Work Resources. The Blantyre Care Facility, 2.571 million. Is that included in the previous cost of 8.7 million?
Councillor Faulkner, it will be. That's the amount that will be spent in year 2022-23.
Second question for me, Provost. So if that's 8.7 million, last week's paper, we're spending 1.6 million on 41 staff for that unit, 20 beds for short-term stay for people who are clinically fit for discharge from hospital. We're spending £10 million. Doesn't seem good value for money. Thank you.
Paul Manning, do you wish to comment?
I don't wish to comment.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
No surprise.
Put your hand down, please, Councillor Faulkner, if you would. Thank you. I can confirm that members approve the recommendations on page 29. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. And moving to the final item, Prudential Indicators, Treasury Management Strategy and Annual Investment Strategy 2022-2023, pages 43 to 68. Can I invite Paul Manning to speak to the report, please?
Okay, thanks, Provost. So this paper, as the Provost says, deals with our Treasury Management Strategy, right? And alongside that, the aspects of the Prudential Indicators and the Investment Strategy. Now, this follows the capital programme, and this is linked in with the capital programme, and that it's about borrowing, and the reason we borrow is to fund our capital programme. So there are three distinct aspects to the paper. The background obviously covers the fact that we do need to bring a paper in this form to this meeting. So first of all, it covers the Prudential Code Indicators, and there's an explanation given there at 4.2 as to what they are. So the Prudential Code is intended to ensure that we've got a framework to make sure that the capital expenditure plans that we've got for the council are affordable, prudent and sustainable. And the second page of the paper goes through how that's done, and it refers to Prudential Indicators, and they're covered in Appendix 1. And there's a summary given there in Section 4 around what they cover. So at 4.7 it says, look, the first three of these indicators show details of capital spend, how it will be funded and set limits for external borrowing. And then the fourth indicator starts to look at the financial impact of the expected borrowing and looking to lay the groundwork to ensure that that's affordable. And again, the point is made there on page 44, this has a relationship to capital spend. Now, those of you who are on the Finance and Corporate Resources Committee are aware that to every committee we bring papers that cover this area of Treasury management and these Prudential Code Indicators. And Jackie Taylor takes that committee through the indicators in a bit of detail. And Jackie's here today as well, if we've got any questions that we want to go into in terms of individual indicators and the things that are in the appendices. A final point on the Prudential Code, and it's about the links to our asset management plans. Now, again, through resource committees, you're aware that these come across the period of the year on an annual basis to try and give a background to our asset condition and how that feeds into need for investment and how in turn that feeds into the capital programme. So they're laid out there at 4.14. So that's about the Prudential Code. The next bit is about Treasury management strategy. Now what that's about is about our borrowing and the factors that are associated with it. So Section 5 goes through that. It talks about why councils hold debt. It talks about our overall level of debt. And then the third part of the paper, which is at Section 6, talks about the annual investment strategy. Now, this is about, in the situations that we have money, what we do with it. And at the appendix at the rear, we lay out our annual investment strategy. And at 6.4, it talks about some of the principles that underpin that. So you can see there in the bullet points, we talk about the importance of security, liquidity, and only then do we consider the return that we would get on money. And also talks about the discretion that councils have got in the investments that they make. So the strategy itself also covers, and this is important, the type of investments that are permitted. And it goes in at the end there, it talks about when you can borrow and borrowing in advance of need, and when you shouldn't do that and when you should do that. So again, there is a lot in the appendices, right? And it's an important paper, and it does have this link to spending plans, particularly on the capital programme. So in the context of recommendations, it takes each of those elements individually and looks for approval on them. The Prudential Code Indicators, the Treasury Management Strategy and the Investment Strategy. So again, Provost, happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Paul. Any questions for Paul? No. Can I confirm that members approve the recommendations, page 43? Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you so much. I have no urgent business and I close the meeting. Thank you. Take care.
Clement, sorry, Clement, as usual, could I get you for 2 minutes?